Hello, everybody. Oh, gosh. Short guy trying to climb into a tall chair. This is going to be entertaining right at the start of the camera.
You know what? You can use a chair to do that because I had to do it last week.
I may have to do that.
To the stool. That's what you do.
Hello, Facebook. I am Edith Ann. No, actually, I am Patrick. Poison Pen Bookstore. I am a big fan of both Margaret Mizushima and Scott Graham, who write two of my all-time favorite mystery series, and I'm so delighted to talk to both of you today. It's exciting because Margaret writes about an area that's very near and dear to my heart. I ended up growing up in northwestern Colorado, so it is always a place that I enjoy going back to and feeling familiar with. And Scott, of course, takes us to the national parks, and he takes us all around the United States. But we're really excited because today he is here to talk about Saguaro National Park, just south of Phoenix in the Tucson border. So for both of you, welcome. For those of you who are not familiar, Margaret writes the Maddie Cobb, now Maddie Ray, K9 series situated in northwestern Colorado. This is book 8. I want to say that I know this is Scott's 8. You two started at the same time.
We did.
So, and Scott's are the national park dealing with Janelle Ortega and Chuck Bender, who is an archaeologist. And so we're getting ourselves down south by Tucson. So both of you, welcome.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, first of all, starting off, both of these books are incredibly tightly paced. These are books that, you have us sitting at the edge of your seat for both of these novels. And Margaret, I normally find that your books get really exciting, but this one is just relentless. Can you tell us a little bit about Standing Dead and what made you decide to kind of up the ante a little bit?
I'll try to. I'm not quite sure I made that decision to up the ante. I think it just sort of happened while I was writing the book. But I wanted to write a book that answered some of Maddie's backstory questions. I felt it was definitely time to let readers and myself know what really happened that night when Maddie was abducted. And to be honest, I didn't even know. So I had to go ahead and figure all that out before I got started. And the tension did just kind of keep on building throughout that book. I was pretty happy with the way it turned out as far as having it be a little bit more suspenseful maybe than some of my books. And Patrick and I were talking before the event that it might be a little darker than some of my books too. So one thing that we do, Scott and I, is we share beta reads. And so Scott always helps me with the tightness of the plot and things like that before we get into the final draft. So I also have Scott to thank for that.
Nice of you to say that.
Scott, I've got to say, you've taken this book in a little bit more of a dark direction as well. And the national parks, you're usually not opposed to a little bit of violence, but this murder in particular is fairly brutal. Can you describe what happens? We're not spoiling. It's the first couple pages of the book.
First page. Yeah. Yeah. In general, I don't have a lot of blood necessarily in my books, but this one just felt right to kind of start right off the bat with that villain, or in this case, there was a debate about pronoun use, but it's a she, so we're right off the bat. We know we've got a villainess, or we know that as we start to meet these suspects, we've got someone who, as we say, has a bit of a taste for blood, and I very quickly go away from that back to more of what I feel like the lighter Carmelita and Rosie, the two daughters, and having fun with them. But I've kind of, you're right. I feel like I wanted to start with that. Okay, we got evil around this time, and part of that really was wanting to talk about the real human aspect of the desert environment, the Sonoran Desert, with regard to the migrant movement through the desert. And there are some bad people working that, working their will against some real desperate people out in the desert. And so I wanted to not only share with people the beauty of the Sonoran Desert and Saguaro National Park in particular, but also the reality of what's going on out there in the desert these days too.
Exactly. Both of you don't shy away from that, which is very impressive. Maddie especially is dealing with going back down south to try to find her mother and to try to get together some information, and you really bring in kind of that sense of desperation that is so apparent in some of these smaller Mexican townships, for instance. And Scott, you really go into talking about the desperation of the flight of the immigrant outside of there. So both of you have these really interesting parallels that, although they don't always meet, they're very similar in terms of flavor and what's kind of occurring, some of these social issues that you want to bring forward. So I'm really curious. This must be just a complete author zeitgeist, that just isn't planned, but sort of meets. So I'm curious with both of you, what interests you in terms of talking about our Mexican neighbors a little bit and some of their social problems as well.
I grew up in Saguaro, Colorado, which has a very high percentage of Hispanic residents. And so having lots of friends from that culture and also being exposed to the food and things like that when we'd go over to visit each other's homes, I really wanted Maddie to have the background where she was half Hispanic and half Caucasian. And so that's kind of how Maddie got developed. And as the series progressed, that's when I decided to take her to Mexico. She really did not go there until she found out that her mother was still alive, and she was able then to go down to Mexico and find her mother. That was after she connected with her grandmother and her sister. So that was, I don't know what causes that, except that a huge interest in the culture and respect for that culture. And so going down to Mexico seemed like the right thing to do for Maddie. Some of my readers at that time kind of wanted Maddie to stay down there, but I don't have enough of experience with Mexico to really go down there and have Maddie stay down there. So she came back to Timber Creek, and my editor also wanted her to come back to Timber Creek. My publisher said that's where readers expect you to be, so we came back to Colorado.
That's really interesting. I hadn't really thought about that parallel as clearly as you're bringing it up, Patrick. But that's really true. That we do have that in common with the series, along with the outdoors nature of the series. In my case, it was a real thought out decision that I'm from Durango, again, southwestern Colorado. We've kind of got the tricultural world going on there, and then with my wife, while she was in school, we spent a decade in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so then what I've got is Chuck Bender, my white guy trying to figure out the world protagonist, with a Latina single mom who he joins up with, and they get married in book one. And then she's got two daughters. And so Chuck is then getting to experience, through her as he and she developed their relationship together through the books. And so in this case, this was the first opportunity for me, and I actually write from Janelle Ortega's point of view in this story, because the story, as you'll read, and again, very quickly, you learn early on in the story that it's her family members who are coming across from Mexico. And so this is the most personal that I've been with Janelle. And it's been fun for me to kind of get to know Janelle through Chuck. Chuck was my safe person, my again, Anglo whatever point of view, and then to have him become the husband to Janelle was a challenge that I set myself to learn that culture and to hopefully be respectful of it. And so I feel like I've come closest with Janelle in this case to really have her become a real part of that story. along with as their relationship has developed, and she's become a real force as well.
It's hard to talk about the West without talking about Mexico and the different social issues that we deal with down here in the South. Being border state is a little bit different, but Colorado also has that, and so much of our culture is shaped by Mexican culture as well. And some of the best Mexican food that you're ever going to have comes out of Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. I mean, you really can't go wrong with it.
Boy, that is for sure, because we recently moved to Washington State, and I would agree with you completely.
Avocados, they're not the same, right? And the peppers, but and the fact that we can take a little heat, I think a little bit more than some people. I mean, it's a little tame some places where you go, but oddly enough, one of the best Mexican food places I ever went to was in Madison, Wisconsin. Of all places, right across from the Radisson in Madison. So, in terms of the Southwest and really researching this, Scott, I found I didn't know much about Saguaro National Park. And to be real honest, I think it's an often forgotten state park here in the state. So what made you decide Saguaro National Park, and what did you learn about Saguaro National Park that you found just absolutely fascinating?
Sure. I was fortunate to, basically my family came west because my grandparents retired to Tucson, Arizona in 1963. And so I have been going from Durango down to Tucson essentially once or twice a year my entire life, and have spent lots of time in what was then Saguaro National Monument, has become Saguaro National Park, and just in that beautiful Sonoran Desert environment. And so that was kind of first and foremost with each of my books. The goal is always to really bring the reader into the national park and give a real sense of place to that national park for the reader. And so in the case of Saguaro, rather than something that surprised me, but something that I really wanted to share with the readers and do right off the bat, is that beautiful smell that all of you that are here today know very well after a rainstorm in the desert, in the Sonoran Desert, where those creosote bushes open up, and as they're pulling in that moisture, they give off that smell that is literally like nothing else on earth. And so that was what I started with, because my childhood and when I think of all the times I've been fortunate enough to be down here in the Sonoran Desert is that smell when you are out in the desert after a rain event. And so I start the book off right with that and then go forward from there.
It's true, there is nothing, for those of you who've never been, there is nothing like that smell of the desert. I think we're all very familiar with it here, and this year especially more so. I don't think, March, I think we had like 3 days without rain or something like that, which it's really been unusual. Let's hope we don't have fires this year. And so Margaret, for you really tried to get into the heart of Colorado as well. Mm-hmm. Over the time, because Timber Creek is a fictional place, what have you modeled it mostly closest to? And also, what is it that kind of drew you to writing about Colorado and really delving deep into kind of the different crimes? You're very much just like Scott, you guys both focus really on kind of social issues, very specific to our kind of neck of the woods.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I was drawn to setting the book in Colorado because I feel like a native. I really didn't move there till I was in high school, but lived near Saguaro, which is a very small town in the mountains, and I really wanted forest around my fictional town. So it's not Saguaro because Saguaro is pretty much open. It's in the San Luis Valley. But there are some things around Saguaro, like the market, Crane's Market, is definitely structured after Smith's Market, a real market in Saguaro. And then there's the Orient Mine, which is an abandoned silver mine that is there near Saguaro as well. And I send Maddie into the Powderhorn Mine in Killing Trail to rescue a child. So that was a mine that I did explore as a teenager, even though it was abandoned and boarded up. So I confess that I was that helped make that mine scene a little bit more real. I just have always loved the state of Colorado as far as the hiking. I think Rocky Mountain National Park is probably the most beautiful spot in the world. And so I created this fictional town that's set somewhere south and west of Saguaro. Durango is commonly mentioned as one of the larger towns near there, and I kind of loosely refer to being about 4 hours from Denver. So that's, how I kind of came up with Timber Creek. What was the other part of that question? I think that maybe I've answered that question.
Yeah, what made you decide to talk a lot about the social issues associated with Colorado? Yeah.
That's what I enjoy reading, is a book that spotlights some kind of social or economic or justice issue. And so I decided that each book would spotlight something that mostly had to do with social issues or family issues. And that's kind of where my strength is because of my background in speech therapy and working with families who have either children with developmental disorders or adults who have acquired speech and language disorders. So I really wanted to focus on families. I have a friend who said we all come from dysfunctional families. It just takes something to show us how dysfunctional we really are. And I think that's true. I think, we all have our quirks in our families, and so I really wanted to bring that out. But also I wanted that veterinary aspect in each book so that Cole could contribute to the solving of the case. And so, unfortunately, some of the veterinary drugs are used in crimes, and it's not that uncommon. And so I decided that I would spotlight various drugs that are used on horses and then sometimes spill over into murder and homicide.
That is one of the things that I really enjoy, is the fact that you bring in, you do bring in a lot of veterinary drugs that are used inappropriately.
Inappropriate drug use, yes.
Especially, I remember the first book, you're talking about, using dogs as drug mules, for instance, and introducing us to Robo. Robo is going to be immortal. I really hope this. Is that the case?
I did have to really slow down the time frame of the stories, even though they've been out now about 8 years. There's really only about 2 years that have passed in Timber Creek because of Robo's lifespan. So yes, and I promise my readers he won't die on my watch.
It's really an important thing, yeah. One of the things I truly loved about, your very first book, Killing Trail, was the fact that you brought us into the relationship between a very damaged woman. Maddie is really broken in that first book, and over the course of 8 books now, she's really grown and changed. Robo has really become as much her companion and her protector, and of course she's also fallen in love with Clay, which is really a great kind of love story right there that you bring in and throughout that premise. Was it your hope that Maddie was going to grow? Because I really feel like as a character, we've grown along with her, and that's part of what's made this series so enjoyable. She's not static.
Thank you. Definitely that was planned from the very beginning. I wanted Maddie to grow and to become healthy. I have a good friend who is a psychologist and has done many types of counseling sessions with different types of battered women or abused women or molested women. And she said, Maddie can be as healthy as you want her to be. We have women who don't want anything to do with relationship, clear to the other side of the spectrum of very healthy women who have recovered and who can have healthy relationships. So that gave me permission to know that even though Maddie was very broken in the beginning, she could heal. And Hunting Hour, book 3, actually focuses on some of her therapy that she is going through, which is, again, totally fine for a police officer to seek out therapy if they want to improve themselves and to heal from something that has nothing, well, even if it has something to do with their job. It's perfectly fine for police officers to be in therapy. And they can even do it privately. They don't have to proclaim that to their supervisors or anything. So I wanted to bring out that aspect. We have mental illness in our family, and so I wanted that to be shown and spotlighted. And that book 3, Hunting Hour, was my book where I spotlighted that and talked about the National Association for the Mentally Ill and helplines that are available. So, yes.
Maddie has a lot of baggage. I mean, that's just who she is and where she's kind of come from. This book really explores why she is as damaged as she is. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason why I say this book is a lot darker, because you're really getting into that, basically the net reason of why she is who she is. Mm-hmm. Not an origin story. Well, I don't know what to call this. This is almost a recovery story.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I think what I wanted to do was to go ahead and give Maddie all those answers, because we've been withholding those answers from Maddie and readers and myself, and I just felt, boy, it's time that we all come together and Maddie learns what happened to her, and so that she can make maybe those final steps in healing.
Now, going on from there, once you finished this book, how did you feel? Was it a catharsis? Was it...
Yes, definitely. It felt really good to get to the end of that book. I was thinking, okay, now this might be a way to wrap up the series. But I decided, no, we're going to go ahead and keep it going. So Maddie in the future will be looking more towards future things and reacting to the things that are happening in her in the future, rather than being so burdened by her past. And I think that'll be good for all of us, readers, and for me, and for probably poor Scott, who has to write the rough drafts.
I will say that it was cathartic for me, just getting to read this and seeing Maddie become who she is. It's just been one of the real pleasures of getting to be an early reader with your stories. It's been really fascinating. It's fun, and to see the way you bring her along, it really is kind of enjoyable. I mean, I say fun in a real way. That to see her become who she is now has been a real pleasure for me as a reader to watch that happen.
And at the same time, it's been a pleasure to see Chuck and Janelle's relationship grow too. So. And I have really enjoyed Janelle growing into a person of her own. So I've really enjoyed that.
I was just going to say that. Your characters also evolve, and they also change. Now, Chuck isn't as burdened as Maddie is. But, I mean, he has a lot of challenges to go through, and to be kind of this new father to 2 teenage girls, on top of, no matter where he goes, he has to solve a crime.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. What I had in mind with Chuck was kind of turning that archetypal Western hero character on its head. And that was kind of where I started from with what I had in mind. But he's basically an Indiana Jones or kind of the Louis L'Amour cowboy Westerner type of guy who's been a dedicated bachelor for really 2 decades when the series starts. And all of a sudden, he's now having to try to learn to be a person who can let other people into his life. And it happens quickly. I mean, and I did that on purpose as well. And so at the very beginning, I mean, Chuck he's not the greatest person. He kind of instigates a physical altercation with someone in the first book. He's kind of lording it over Janelle a little bit, I would say. And it's been fun for me then to let Janelle kind of teach him. This is how I see it. To let her teach him how to be a better human being, and that's been kind of my goal for him. And then at the same time, I feel like he's learned to give her the space to grow as a person as well. And so she's really become more of a force, I feel like, in each book. And then the girls, in my case, the girls are growing up a year older with each book. And so they then have kind of come into their own as well and have challenged Chuck in their own way. And again, in this book, Carmelita is challenging Chuck, and he's learning, hopefully, throughout all of these books, to be a better person and just basically how to be a father to begin with, but to hopefully be a better father as he moves forward.
But it's fun because the girls actually enjoy what Dad does. And so they start showing off a little bit for him in the beginning of the book, which I thought was really entertaining. And talking about, the difference between pictographs and
Petroglyphs.
Petroglyphs, thank you.
Yeah.
Just lost the word there. So, it's really a lot of fun. The girls are starting to become their own people, but at the same time, they're really appreciating who Dad is. And that's part of the fun of both of your books, is the fact that you've developed real people. You've developed characters that we want to read about, and part of the reason why we're reading these is for the mystery, but it's really more for the people.
And to me, those are the mysteries that I enjoy the most as well. As I was saying, it's been so much fun to watch Maddie come into her own with Cole and with the daughters, and so it's been fun for me then to see what I like about these other mystery series and attempt, and with that goal of doing the same thing with mine. Because to me, that is what's fun, is that we're serialized here. We're watching year by year these characters, and if they're static, it's no fun. And so that is the fun for me to think, okay, what can I share with readers that I think is going to be fascinating to me, and then fascinating to them, not only with the national park and with the mystery, but also with these what I feel like are totally human people at this point for me. The girls are growing up a little too fast for me right now, and that's kind of troubling me. It's fascinating. How can that be happening in my head? It's fascinating, and so I hope I'm sharing that with my readers.
Have you been a father to teenage girls before?
No, and that was a purposeful decision as well. I was an at-home dad for really most of 2 decades. That was my primary thing that I was doing. My wife was a physician. She was bringing home she was the person who was putting the bread on the table, and I was home with 2 boys and had a wonderful time raising 2 sons into young adulthood. And so I thought, okay, if this series is going to go somewhere, it would be fun to challenge myself to see about raising a couple of daughters instead. And also, honestly, I was afraid about what it would be like to raise daughters, and especially through those teenage years. And so if the series was going to go somewhere, I felt there would be some friction there, and there would be some of Chuck's fear that would come through me, I hoped. Because it is kind of scary as an adult dad of 2 boys, like, oh yeah, we're fine, no problem. And I watch these teenage girls, and I'm like, ooh, I'm so glad I have boys. And now, so I kind of set myself that challenge, and then that makes Chuck then facing that challenge along with me.
Margaret, do you ever tell him when he gets it wrong?
Well, I think maybe once or twice, but not very often. He says that I help him with the daughters and the animals, and he helps me with plot holes and action. So we're compatible beta readers.
Exactly, a dynamic duo together. And that's really a lot of fun, because when we get 2 authors who are legitimately friends as well, and then you feed off of each other, do you find that is something that you need sometimes to kick off the creative writing process?
Oh, yes. It was so helpful. We did start our mysteries totally not knowing each other. And I think we probably met around book 2 or book 3 when we were writing our books. But it was interesting that we kicked off about the same year as far as releasing our first books. And then there were these complementary elements in our books. Chuck has 2 daughters, and Cole has 2 sons, and Cole has 2 daughters. I wasn't as brave as Scott was, because we did raise 2 daughters. So I decided to go ahead and do the easy thing, I think, with the family issues. And I loved raising 2 girls. It wasn't that hard, Scott.
Okay. and I will say, it has been one of the great pleasures for me of this entire endeavor to get to know Margaret and to share work with Margaret and to become a dear friend with Margaret. You know, when you're writing these stories, you're spending so much time sitting in front of a computer all alone, day after day, hour after hour. And just knowing that Margaret was out there doing the same thing, you know, we would share, you know, just back and forth emails now and then, but knowing that we're on the same journey together, and to have been on the same journey over these years now with someone who is such a wonderful person. I mean, you read her books and you wonder, okay, what's she really going to be like? But, you know, she knows she's got an alter ego thing going here, because she's just the most wonderful. You are just the most wonderful person, and it has been such a pleasure, a real part of this last decade, to become friends and to share our work together.
Well, it really has been a pleasure, and I always know that if there's something troubling me, there's somebody I can write to and get some support and encouragement. That is for sure, yes.
Both of you have a darker side that you probably deeply bury. In terms of these books, I mean, you've really taken it to a little bit of a darker side for both of you, a little bit more serious. Is that a response maybe a little bit to post-COVID, you think, or to other things? I mean, not that it's lost its lightness, the characters are still good, but this is definitely, for both of you, a much more serious book.
Yep. In my case, it really came, and I will say my new book that I'm working on now will come out next, much lighter, more fun. And this one, I think there's still plenty of the girls, plenty of fun. It was an cover article in the New York Times Magazine that one of those amazing reporters, the New York Times, went to and found one of the bodies of a migrant who had died in the desert, used the ID that was with that body to track backward and to tell the story of this young man who had died in the desert. So went back to Guatemala, found the family, found this young man's wife, child, which was why he was driven to try to cross the desert. The story turned out to be that he was doing okay, but he was with a friend. The friend ran out of water. He gave his friend water to help his friend. And then again, the reporter interviews the friend, who then survives and gets out of the desert. And because the young man who died had given up his water, he died. And was left behind in the desert. And so it was just this tragedy that it just really, I couldn't let go of it. And so it was that story, I think, that then makes me want to tell the reality, which it is a dark reality that's happening south of us right now. And so that was really what I wanted to share with people. Not really in a political way as much as just in a human way.
Exactly. And it's a daily thing. I mean, it's not a, it's an hourly thing. It's, people are just constantly coming across the border and constantly moving, and so many places, so many people just don't make it. They don't make it someplace where they can get water, or where they can get shelter, or they happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time. They get swept away by, a flash flood or something like that. I mean, it's so dangerous coming across the border, and they don't have a safe way to do it.
Right, and that's what I wanted to share, along with the beauty of the desert and the beauty of the Saguaro Desert, the human reality of it as well. So that was the goal.
And it's amazing, trying to survive the desert. I mean, it's not a friendly place.
Right.
It's a beautiful place. It's a place I'd recommend people to see. Just bring a lot of water and don't go during the summer. Bad idea. 120 degrees is never pleasant.
No.
In terms of what's coming next for both of you, what are the plans?
Well, I am writing book 9, and because we have moved to Washington, I felt that Maddie and Cole needed to go to Washington. So, in chapter 1, Maddie gets a call that there is a missing child in Washington. It's a high-profile case, a missing child of a celebrity. And they are putting together a regional team, and they need more dogs who can air scent. And so Maddie gets this call from Sergeant Jim Madsen, Robo's trainer, and she agrees to go to Washington State to join that team 7 days before her wedding. So Cole, whose parents aren't, whose mother is not, you're going to finally get to meet Cole's parents. And his mother is not very happy about the fact that he is marrying a law enforcement officer. So he has just defended the fact that he is going to marry this Leo, And sure enough, he gets home and she's taking off and leaving him with the plans for the wedding. So yeah, there's going to be some stressful times for both of them. But I wanted to put Maddie into an environment that's totally new for her. Maddie has grown and she has developed friendships in her sheriff's department that she works in. And I thought, well, what if Maddie had to go into a completely new team and do completely different work? And so that's where she's going. That's where she's headed. But Robo will be there at her side.
And number 9 for me is Death Valley Duel. So we're going to Death Valley National Park. The first chapter is actually at the back of Saguaro Sanction. And not only is the kind of the social justice or environmental issue we're talking about is the Owens Valley and the takings of the water decades ago from the eastern side of the Sierra down to Los Angeles and what that has resulted in terms of the drying out of the valley and Owens Lake. Then the other story is that Carmelita has turned into, from a rock climber that she has been, to a trail runner. And based on the fact that I've got my older son, who has been doing some of those ultra trail running races where they run all day and all night. And my wife and I have gotten to be support crew for him. And so we're there kind of running around in these various places where they come into the aid stations and you're trying to give them fresh socks and snacks and get their water filled up, and they're being checked in on the computer by the people that are there with their GPS chips. And it's really a chaotic kind of middle of the night thing. Everybody's tired. And so when we were there and we were doing this, on the second race, it occurred to me, I'm looking around thinking, this is a great way to kill people. Because it's just you look around and you're like, oh, what, you can just slip a little poison over here, and you can, someone's on their headlamp in the night, you can off a clip. And so this will be much more, we're going back towards some of that lighter territory.
First yearning, now poisoning. For the audience here, does anybody have questions? And for those of you who are on Facebook, feel free to ask questions. In a minute, I'm going to go running around the camera, and I'll be asking your questions. So for those of you who are here, do you guys have any questions for Margaret or Scott? Be brave. Ashley.
I was wondering, how did you two meet?
I'll answer that because I reached out to Margaret. Margaret has been and is still a force in the Rocky Mountain Mystery Writers of America organization and in the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers groups, both of those based in the Front Range in Colorado. And so I saw what she was doing. I saw some of the comparables that we had with our characters and with what we were doing. And so I reached out to her and I said, hey, you want to trade manuscripts and have a look at each other's manuscripts? And it just grew from there.
That's nice.
That was very nice, very nice.
You guys thought about writing a book together?
We keep joking about it. And you really could. There are some who do that. And so we were talking about the fact that now with Margaret being in the Northwest, and I took a trip to Olympic National Park this summer and spent time there really looking at it. And so I know that I'll be leaning heavily on Margaret as we go forward. In fact, you are already building your library of reference books for that area. So it's been discussed, but it hasn't happened yet.
Cece.
I'm always interested in process, so I would like to know how each of you write your books. Do you plan it ahead? You mentioned a couple of things you didn't know were going to happen, and I wanted to know how you do it too, Scott.
I used to outline each book, not the first book, but that took me about 4 years to write. And when you get to your contract and you have 6 months to write the second book, you have to write a little faster. So I did learn how to outline books, and I did that until about Tracking Game. And at that point, I was just not able to outline anymore. So I put together a very loose 3-act structure summary of what I want to happen in each act. And sometimes I know where the book is going to head at the end, and sometimes I don't know that definitely. And I'm kind of a slow writer. I shoot for about 5,000 words a week, and takes me 4 to 6 months to get something ready to send to my publisher.
And in my case, I'm the term, of course, you've heard is pantser versus outliner, and I'm definitely a seat of the pantser. I have really enjoyed just kind of going in fairly blind to these stories. I know I've got my park. I know I've got the basic story that's going to happen to the characters. If you think about Death Valley Duel, we've got the Ultra Race. I know I'm talking about water issues with regard to the Owens Valley and the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. So I've got those big pieces, but by and large, I have fun just letting the story unfold. The problem, of course, is that you end up going on many tangents, and then you have to lop those tangents off and kind of beat your people back into the story. But it's so much more fun for me, and I feel like the result is the reader has a lot more fun also. I did try outlining one time, and I spent 3 weeks, I think it was book 3. I decided this is going to be the way it's going to go, and I'm just going to really be smart about it this time. And so I spent 3 weeks. I had all my 3x5 index cards. There are all these things you can do that are how to outline. And then as soon as I started writing, the outline went right out the door, and it just wasted 3 weeks basically. So I've learned to just have fun with it, and I hope that the reader then gets to have fun as well. I'm like Margaret. I'm a morning writer. I at 8 to noon, and I force myself to do a minimum number of words because otherwise, if it's like just a certain amount of time, nothing will happen. So I make sure that I'm going to do 1,000 words minimum each day. It'll often be 2,000 or 1,500, but always 1,000 before I'm allowed to leave my computer.
Who's your most problematic character?
Oh, definitely Maddie. It's interesting that my editor has pointed out that I'm often very focused with the technique and the technical aspect of what Maddie is doing, and I forget to put in how Maddie feels and what her emotion is. So there, it's thank goodness for editors, right? Because she has pointed this out for me, and so now I really pay attention to that. I've been married to a veterinarian for 41 plus years, and so that life is easy for me. And so it's so much easier to get into Cole's head and to write Cole's point of view chapters.
What about you, Scott?
That's a cool question. I had not been asked that before, and it's interesting because immediately I think about the fact that it's Rosie of the 4 in the family, and Rosie's the fun one. She's kind of I think of her as kind of the comic relief, and I have such respect for authors who can just write humor so beautifully and make it look so easy. And for me, it's a real challenge. And Rosie has been, as a result, has been my challenge because I want her to add lightness to the story, but it doesn't come naturally to me. But of course, with a character that you want to be fun and gregarious and outgoing, it needs to feel very natural to her. And so I rewrite her probably more than anyone else, any of my characters.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have your own Mrs. Gibbs?
Oh, don't I wish I did have my own Mrs. Gibbs. No. My husband and I managed the kids even though we had 2 careers going on, and we had latchkey kids. So, yes, I wish. Boy, wouldn't that be wonderful?
Margaret, how did your move affect writing time and what you were doing with an upcoming book?
Well, we moved really over a process of about 2 years because my husband and I had 2 businesses on our property, his vet clinic and our Angus cattle farm. And so it really took a process of phasing out the farm business, phasing out the veterinary practice. And so then the packing started, and when we were going to move, we didn't know where we were moving to yet. And so what we did was we bought a container, and we packed everything in that, and I had to get rid of probably, maybe half of our belongings so that we could pack everything into that one container. And we stored it on a friend's property until we could find a place to buy in Washington. We were moving during that crazy time where real estate was so high, and so it took us several offers on places to find the right place. But I had no writing time, during that period. So I had asked for 18 months between books. And oddly enough, Scott had asked his publisher for 18 months between books. We just do these things. But between Striking Range and Standing Dead, there was 18 months. And I have asked for 18 months again, so it'll be 18 months before book 9 comes out.
Quality takes time, doesn't it?
Well, it does take some time and some focus. And I think that you get so scattered when you're trying to pick up and move across country. It's crazy.
I'm getting lots of hellos from all over the world, so that is very cool. We tend to have an international audience here at the Pen. Debbie Brown just had a really interesting comment. She says, "Hi, Margaret. Serendipity. I just learned about you yesterday when Peggy Rothschild mentioned you in her latest book, Playing Dead. I researched and found out you're real. And here you are today. Looking forward to reading your books."
So I have Playing Dead on my Kindle, and I will be reading it soon. I didn't know that Peggy mentioned me in that book. That's so wonderful. How exciting. Thank you for mentioning it.
So much fun. And then just lots of loves from all over. People are able to hear us. That makes me happy. I think one of the great things that people mentioned is your development of real people and real characters, and for both of you. So it sounds like from Facebook, they are all very, very positive about your book. Is there anything that you guys want to talk about your book? Give us a little pitch on why we should be reading more Standing Creek and Standing Dead and Saguaro Sanction.
You want to go first?
Well, what I'll add that I haven't gotten talked about is that we've talked about the migrant issue that is the kind of that social issue that runs through the story. The archaeological issue, there's always an archaeological aspect to each of the books. And in this case, what has taken Chuck to the desert are petroglyphs and a study of petroglyphs in the desert. And if people from here are familiar, the Hohokam and the beautiful petroglyphs, especially further south from here, are just remarkable out there in the desert. And they're mysterious in and of themselves. And so to me, they lend themselves to being just this wonderful mystery aspect. And that's the story then that I tell through Saguaro Sanction that I hope people will really, really enjoy. Talk about spirals, talk about there are so many mysterious ideas for where these came from, why they are there, and so I just wanted to play with that, and I feel like that's the thing that people will really be able to enjoy and have fun with in the story.
There's some really, I was reading some things about ancient Arizona, during the Cretaceous, and it's rather interesting that they talk about the fact that Arizona was a sea beforehand, and the Hohokam often talk about people coming from the sea, and they settled here in the Southwest. So it's sort of fascinating to see how some of their stories sort of mirror kind of the geologic changes that have occurred over the millions and millions of years.
That's right, and it comes forward to the Tohono O'odham people who then talk about, and again I tell that the creation story of the Tohono O'odham in here, and the fact that they feel they came from out of a flood in the desert, and then and so their creation stories I get to tell and share that as well, because the story takes place not only in Saguaro National Park but on the Tohono O'odham Reservation as well, and so there's a good bunch of the story that takes place out there, and so I get to share that with readers as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah. It is, yes. I think we didn't talk a lot about the darkness in this book, but Maddie is taunted by a killer, and she knows that it through handwritten notes to her that are planted either on bodies or on a windshield of her car, things like that. And she knows that this killer has her mother. And so Maddie has to go into this killer's lair, and she can't take Robo with her. And so that probably was Maddie's biggest challenge that we've had to date in the series. And Robo does still have a big part in the book, leading up to that split that they have to do. And then he also has a big part in the book later as the book closes out. So Robo lovers will still get to see him in action. But yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think really drew me to that book was I wanted Maddie to really stand on her own, and she does. She stands on her own really well.
Now, for either of you, have either of your books been optioned into movies, and are you open for that to happen, either being optioned by Hollywood or by television?
Yes, I'm definitely open, and we're shopping, and wouldn't it be wonderful? Yeah, we've had a little feedback about how difficult it would be to train the dog. So yeah,
It's not training the dog, it's they have to have at least 3 dogs.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a dog for any kind of film or anything, so to have 3 localized dogs is really impossible, but they are now using computer-generated dogs.
Yeah.
If you watched The Call of the Wild, the new version of it, the dog was entirely CGI.
Is that right?
What was your favorite part?
My favorite part, I guess if I'm thinking about the stories that I've written, would be Mesa Verde. And simply for selfish reasons, because it's my home. I think of it as my hometown book, as my hometown park. They're outside of Durango, and I know it so intimately. And it is the most archaeological of my stories. So the getting to tell the stories that I have been raised with in Durango made me just really enjoy writing Mesa Verde Victim. And so then it continues to be my favorite part. I mean, again, talking about this mysterious past of these peoples who lived in these parts of the world before us, it just lights up everyone's brain. And so to get to have that light. I mean, I think about Mesa Verde now and the cliff dwellers and those amazing structures they left, and it just lights up my brain. So that's my.
Have you gone to Glacier Park yet?
Haven't gone to Glacier yet, but it's high on the list. It's high on the list.
And it's nice to know that we've got somebody who's kind of taken the reins from Nevada Bar and given us a little bit of a sense of the national parks.
I feel so fortunate to have learned and to see what she did and has done, because it's fascinating to be able to know that I'm kind of literally riding some coattails here and taking advantage of this wonderful body of work that she produced, but hopefully in my own way and in a way that continues what I hope is this her wonderful legacy in a good and positive way.
So let me add that Ann Hillerman, in her new books with the Tony Hillerman characters, is visiting national parks. She'll be here on April 24th, and she's at Big Ears National Monument. The last book, she was at Lake Powell with the bridge. I'm trying to remember, is it called the Rainbow Bridge? Right, and then she started in Monument Valley. So if you're interested in national parks, the continuation of the Bernie Manuelito books by Ann would be fun. I got up on my phone, I wanted to show it to you because it's so much fun, I have to walk it around the room. But this is our Saguaro.
Oh, really?
For Christmas. This is how it looks. Isn't it great? So,
It's hard to share on
Saguaro,
Facebook.
this is basically an Arizona. Basically an Arizona Christmas.
You have to be here.
It took 3 guys in a bucket truck 9 hours
To get all the
and
lights
burning
on.
money while we were doing it.
Yeah.
But I think it's just absolutely gorgeous. Did you have a chance to see it? So this is kind of like an Arizona, maybe I can go around here. There we go. An Arizona Christmas tree, if you have a Saguaro. So it's particularly fun to do that.
Pam,
Well,
yes.
Scott, when you in Saguaro National Park, how long did you physically spend there before writing about it?
What I've learned to do is to spend several days to a week immediately before starting to write about each park.
Okay.
And that has been enough to be able to walk the trails where I feel like where the story I'm planning to set it is going to take place, and to just have that good sense of place that I feel like I can go back home then and just dive in and really share the real feel for that park. So, but it is always right before I'll start a manuscript. I want to try to be there, for that chunk of time.
Are there any of the national parks that made you feel a little eerie being at?
I can't say, because to me the mysteries are fun. I know we talk about the fact there's people dying and whatnot, but I'm always up here I'll kind of X out the deaths, and I'm just having fun with that. And so even though I'm killing off people, I'm smiling about it. And so no, it's mostly just I love these national parks, and so they don't. To me, I've spent lots and lots of time in all of these national parks, and I just get a real kick out of sharing them with people.
Wow, that's sort of a good place to end. For those of you who are wanting to get books signed or ask other questions from Scott and from Margaret, feel free to do so. For our Facebook audience, thank you so much for watching today. We're really appreciative. For those of you who want to read Scott's book, the newest one is Saguaro Sanction. Here you can get a signed copy. We still have a few left here at the pen. And the same with Margaret Mizushima's Standing Dead. Again, we have both available, and of course we can ship all over the world. So for those of you who like programs like this is your PBS plug. Your book purchases provide us these programs. So thank you very much to everybody, and thank you, audience. Have a wonderful day. For those of you who physically come, some people bake. John Charles is our baker, and he has given us lemon squares and raspberry squares and black tea. And so if you go downstairs and you have one and you enjoy one, thank him for you always I think that's the best payment for it.
It is, and don't forget Betty Webb
will be at 4 o'clock.
At 4, but maybe slightly earlier. I just reread the end, so I was being rude to you, but I felt a little pressure there.
Exactly.
And it's really a very, very interesting idea. So stay if you can.
And Margaret, Scott, would you like to say goodbye to Facebook? Goodbye, Facebook.